It starts quietly. Not with thunder, not with revelation, but with a faint crack in the glass of everything they believed was real. They wake up one morning and something feels off. The world looks the same faces, the same routines, but underneath, something has shifted. They can't unsee it. The illusion that once made everything feel safe begins to shimmer and break. Conversations sound rehearsed. Smiles look painted on. The rhythm of daily life, once so predictable, now feels hollow. It's like realizing the laughter in the room is coming from a recording familiar but empty. At first, they try to ignore it. They tell themselves it's just a phase, a mood, maybe exhaustion. But the truth doesn't fade. It sharpens. They start noticing how people talk without really saying anything, how they rush to fill silence with noise, how they wear confidence like a costume, and somewhere deep inside, a voice whispers, "Was it always like this?" They begin to see how much of life runs on autopilot, how people chase approval, attention, distraction, anything to avoid the quiet. It's dizzying, this new awareness. It's like being backstage at a play you once starred in, watching the set collapse, realizing the laughter and applause were all part of the act. What used to feel like belonging now feels like pretending. They don't mean to pull away, but once the curtain lifts, the old world can't hold them anymore. Small talk feels unbearable. The things that once entertained now drain them. Their old ambitions start to crumble, one by one, revealing how much of their life was built around what others expected. Every truth uncovered feels like a tiny heartbreak, and yet there's beauty in it too. A strange freedom. It's painful, yes, to see so clearly, to realize how much was illusion, to understand that most people would rather keep dreaming than wake up. But awareness, once it comes, cannot be undone. It hums beneath the surface of everything, demanding honesty. They start spending more time alone, not because they want to isolate, but because solitude feels cleaner, like air untouched by performance. In quiet moments, they begin to sense a new kind of clarity, forming fragile but alive. It's not about knowing everything. It's about finally seeing what is. They look around and wonder how many others have noticed too. How many have glimpsed through the cracks, but turned away, afraid of what they'd lose. Because seeing the truth changes everything. It costs you comfort. It costs you belonging. But it gives you something far rarer, sight. And so begins the unraveling. Not a breakdown, but a breaking open. The start of a journey where the light is too honest to ignore, and the darkness too familiar to fear. The moment the illusion shatters is the moment the soul wakes up, and nothing, not even the ache that follows, can ever put it back to sleep again. There's a strange heaviness that comes after the awakening, not the shock of seeing, but the weight of knowing. Once the illusion breaks, there's no going back to how things were. They start to carry something invisible, something others can't feel or understand. It's not sadness exactly, but a deep awareness that sits behind their eyes. They see too much now, the quiet suffering behind smiles, the fear that hides beneath ambition, the desperate need people have to seem okay. It's like walking through a crowded room and hearing every unspoken thought. They wish they could unsee it. Life was simpler when they believed what they were told, when they thought happiness meant fitting in. But now, every truth they uncover brings a new ache. They see how people cling to distractions, scrolling, working, gossiping, anything to avoid stillness. They realize that most don't want truth. They want comfort, and that realization stings. At first, they try to share what they've seen. They speak honestly, hoping someone will understand, hoping someone else has noticed too. But their words fall heavy, met with uneasy silence or polite smiles. Some tell them they're overthinking. Others laugh it off. Slowly, they learn that clarity is not something you can hand to others. It has to rise in them, like it did in you painfully, inevitably. And so, they grow quieter. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they've learned that most ears aren't ready. They start to guard their truth like something sacred. Awareness becomes a private thing, a light they keep hidden, because showing it only blinds those still asleep. But the burden remains. Seeing the truth means seeing the suffering too, in friends who fake their joy, in families built on silence, in strangers pretending not to be lonely. It's not judgment, it's compassion. But it hurts. They start to understand why people choose denial. Because denial is soft, easy, familiar. Clarity, on the other hand, is sharp. It cuts through illusion, but it also cuts through comfort. There are moments when they envy those who still believe, the ones laughing without questioning, chasing without thinking, loving without fearing the end. They remember what that felt like, the lightness of not knowing. But deep down, they know they can't go back. Once the curtain's lifted, pretending feels like lying. So they learn to carry it. The weight of seeing, the loneliness of understanding, the ache of being awake in a world that still sleeps. It's not a curse, though it feels like one at times. It's a quiet kind of honor to see clearly, even when it hurts. Over time, the heaviness shifts. It doesn't disappear, but it becomes familiar, like an old companion walking beside them. And in that quiet companionship, they begin to realize something. Awareness may be heavy, but it's real. And the real, even when it hurts, is always lighter than the lie. It doesn't happen all at once. It begins slowly, a skipped gathering, a message left unanswered, a conversation they can't quite force themselves to care about. They tell themselves they're just tired, just need some space. But deep down, they know it's more than that. Something inside them is pulling away, gently but firmly, from everything that no longer feels real. They start noticing how draining it feels to be around noise, the endless chatter, the forced laughter, the constant need to perform. Every word that doesn't mean anything begins to echo like static in their mind. They used to join in, smile, and pretend. But now, the act feels heavy. They crave quiet the way a starving person craves food. At first, people notice. "You've changed," they say. "You're so distant lately." They don't mean it as kindness. It's confusion, maybe even disappointment. But how do you explain that distance isn't avoidance, it's healing? That stepping back isn't rejection, it's return. Return to the self, to the soul, to something real. So they begin to drift, quietly. They don't announce it or explain. They simply stop showing up to places that ask them to be someone they're not. Their world shrinks, but it also deepens. The noise fades, and the silence, at first unbearable, starts to breathe. It expands like a universe they'd forgotten existed. In that stillness, they start hearing things they never noticed before. The hum of their own thoughts, the soft rhythm of their heartbeat, the whisper of intuition that had been drowned out for years. It's strange at first, how loud silence can be. It confronts them with everything they used to run from: loneliness, uncertainty, unprocessed pain. But slowly, they realize the silence isn't empty. It's full of truth. They begin to see that solitude isn't a punishment. It's a sanctuary. It's where the soul stretches, where the mind can breathe without having to perform. Alone, they start remembering who they were before the world told them who to be. They find beauty in small things again: the flicker of candlelight, the wind moving through trees, the quiet peace of existing without needing to prove anything. People might think they've disappeared, but in truth, they're reappearing, just not in the same way. The withdrawal is not a breaking away from life, but a return to its essence. They no longer chase validation or noise to fill the spaces within them. They begin to see that stillness was never the absence of life. It was the doorway back to it. And so, they stay in the quiet. It's uncomfortable, yes. Sometimes it feels like loneliness. Other times, like freedom. But somewhere in that silence, they realize they're not retreating from the world, but they're finding their place in it, one step back at a time. At first, the silence feels unbearable. It's too still, too revealing. They sit alone, and the quiet presses against them like a weight. Without noise to hide behind, there's nowhere to run, no phone, no distractions, no laughter to mask the ache. It's just them now, sitting with their own thoughts. And in that stillness, something begins to happen. The silence starts to reflect. They begin to see themselves, not the version they show the world, but the real one underneath. The one who's been holding everything together for years. The one who smiles when they're tired, who forgives too easily, who hides their pain behind calmness. It's strange at first, like meeting a stranger who somehow feels familiar. But the longer they sit with it, the more they realize this is who they've always been, just buried under expectation and noise. Old memories rise like ghosts, the ones they thought they'd forgotten. The words they never said, the moments they wish they could change, the dreams they left behind because life told them to be realistic. It's uncomfortable to face all the little pieces of themselves they ignored. But the mirror doesn't lie. It shows everything, the wounds, the fears, the beauty they forgot they had. They start to notice how much of their life was spent performing. How often they said, "I'm fine," when they weren't. How they played roles, the good friend, the reliable one, the listener, while their own voice went unheard. In solitude, those masks begin to fall, one by one. And beneath them, there's something raw but true, an unfiltered self that feels both fragile and powerful. There are moments they want to escape it. The silence gets too honest, too heavy. They reach for their phone, for music, for anything to drown it out. But each time they come back, the quiet welcomes them like an old friend, patient and knowing. It doesn't judge. It just waits for them to stop running. Slowly, the mirror begins to change. It no longer shows only the pain. It starts to reveal something softer, strength. They see the resilience that carried them through heartbreak. The quiet courage in the way they kept showing up for others. The deep compassion in the way they still believe in goodness, even after being hurt. For the first time, they begin to understand that the things they saw as weaknesses were actually signs of depth. They realize solitude isn't lonely when you learn to sit with yourself. It's honest. It strips away everything false until only truth remains. And in that truth, they begin to find peace, not the kind that depends on others, but the kind that grows from within. The silence that once scared them now feels sacred. It's no longer empty. It's full of memories, lessons, and the person they are becoming. The mirror of solitude doesn't flatter or comfort, but it frees. Because once you've seen yourself clearly, you can never again live as someone you're not. When the noise of the world finally fades, something unexpected begins to happen. The silence starts to speak. It doesn't use words. Not at first. It begins as a faint hum, a kind of vibration beneath their thoughts. Then slowly, it grows louder, more distinct. What used to be drowned out by constant distraction now has space to echo. The inner world starts to awaken. At first, it's confusing. Their mind feels crowded, full of half-finished thoughts, forgotten feelings, and old memories rising like waves. Things they never dealt with start replaying in flashes. A sentence someone once said, a choice they regret, a moment they never understood until now. It's like the past has been waiting for this silence to finally be heard. Some of these echoes are kind, soft reminders of who they were before the world hardened them. Others are sharp, the voice of doubt, of guilt, of fear. It's not easy to listen. It takes courage to face the noise inside, because it doesn't stay quiet until you understand it. But they begin to realize that even the painful voices have meaning. They aren't there to punish, they're trying to teach. They notice there's not just one voice inside, but many. One belongs to the child they used to be honest, curious, unafraid to dream. Another belongs to the critic, shaped by the opinions of others, always reminding them of what they should be. There's also the voice of the heart, calm, intuitive, often ignored, but always right. The deeper they listen, the more they learn which voices come from truth and which come from fear. They start journaling, walking, sitting in silence not to escape their thoughts, but to hear them clearly. The chaos begins to turn into rhythm. Thoughts become like music, layered, complex, sometimes haunting, but beautiful in their own way. They learn to tell the difference between the voice that drains them and the one that heals. Slowly, a pattern forms. Beneath all the noise, beneath the memories and the doubt, there's one voice that feels different. It doesn't shout or demand. It simply is. It feels ancient, wise, familiar, like it's been waiting for them all along. This is the voice within, the one they used to hear as a child before the world told them to stop imagining. It's patient. It speaks through feeling more than words, through small intuitions and sudden clarity. They begin to trust it, not blindly, but gently. It guides them, not with rules, but with knowing. When they follow it, things start to make quiet sense. Not everything gets easier. Life still tests them, but the confusion begins to lift. They realize the voice within was never lost. It was just buried under years of noise. Now, when they sit in silence, it no longer feels empty or lonely. It feels alive, filled with echoes, whispers, guidance. They no longer seek answers from the outside. They've found something far more powerful, the ability to listen to the truth already living inside them. There comes a point when understanding stops feeling like light and starts feeling like distance. The more they see, the fewer people seem to walk beside them. What used to connect them to others, shared worries, shared dreams, now feels like another language. They're still surrounded by people, but it feels different, like being in a crowded room where no one speaks the same tongue. Awareness has become both a bridge and a wall. It feels like a desert, vast, silent, endless. There's no map here, no familiar landmarks to guide the way, just truth, stripped bare of comfort. The illusions that once made life warm, the ideas of who they were supposed to be, what happiness should look like, have all fallen away. What's left is honest but hard. It's clarity without cushion, beauty without disguise. Some days they miss the old ignorance, the laughter that came easily, the certainty of belonging. But clarity has a cost, and that cost is illusion. Once truth takes root, there's no pretending the sand is water. And so they walk, quietly, through the empty spaces of their mind, learning that peace doesn't always come with joy. Sometimes it comes with emptiness first. The desert tests them. It asks questions the world never did. Who are you when there's no one to impress? What remains when everything false is gone? The answers don't come quickly. They echo in the distance, carried by wind, arriving only when they've learned to wait. At first, they fight the silence. They want signs, meaning, comfort. But the desert offers none. It only mirrors what they bring into it. When they're restless, it feels endless. When they're patient, it begins to open. Slowly, they learn that the desert isn't punishment, it's purification. The emptiness burns away everything unnecessary until only truth remains. Nights are the hardest. When the stars hang above like cold reminders of how small they are, doubt creeps in. They wonder if the journey is worth it, if clarity is just another form of loneliness. But then something quiet happens, a shift, a calmness that feels almost sacred. They start to understand that being alone in truth is better than being surrounded by illusion. The more they walk, the lighter they become. Without masks to carry, without constant noise to maintain, they start to feel a strange freedom, a stillness that no one taught them, but that feels deeply familiar. They realize that the desert is not empty after all. It's alive in its own way, every grain of sand reflecting the same quiet truth they're learning to live with. Eventually, they stop searching for an exit. They begin to listen to the silence, to trust it. The desert no longer feels lonely. It feels sacred, like the pause between breaths. This is where wisdom begins, not in knowing everything, but in accepting that not everything can be known. Clarity isolates, yes, but in that isolation, The soul finally learns to hear itself without interference. There comes a moment when holding on starts to hurt more than letting go. They don't plan it, don't announce it, it just happens quietly, like a thread snapping somewhere deep inside. The bonds that once defined them, the need to be understood, the craving for approval, the constant pull to belong, begin to loosen. It isn't anger that drives it, it's exhaustion. A deep, soul-level tiredness from carrying what no longer fits. They start to see how much of their life was built around pleasing others. The small ways they shaped themselves to be liked. The silent agreements to stay quiet when they wanted to speak. They see how often they bent to keep the peace, even when it meant betraying themselves. At first, it's hard to accept. Detachment sounds harsh, almost cold. But the truth is, it's mercy, a way of setting the soul free from what drains it. They begin to pull their energy back, slowly but surely. They stop explaining themselves to people who have already decided what to believe. They stop chasing validation that only ever came in fragments. They stop trying to fix things that were never theirs to heal. And though it feels strange at first, even lonely, something within them starts to steady. The noise quiets. The constant reaching softens. People notice, of course. Some call it distance. Others call it selfishness. But they know better now. They've learned that boundaries aren't walls, they're gates that keep peace inside. They no longer feel the urge to defend their silence. They understand that not everyone is meant to walk the same path, and that's okay. Love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it means releasing what was never meant to stay. In this space, they begin to rediscover their own center. They realize how much of their worth was once tied to how others saw them. Now, without those attachments, they start to see themselves clearly again. The approval they used to chase begins to lose its power. Their validation no longer comes from likes, compliments, or attention. It comes from integrity, from knowing they're finally being honest with themselves. There's grief in it too, the quiet mourning of old identities, old versions of themselves built on connection and expectation. But beneath that grief, there's relief. Freedom feels strange after years of attachment, but it's the kind of strange that feels like home. They begin to move differently now, slower, lighter, more intentional. They don't explain, they don't justify, they simply let go. The cords of dependency dissolve like smoke, not torn or cut, but released. What remains is peace, still and strong, unshakable. They realize that detachment isn't the absence of love, it's the presence of truth. It means caring without clinging, giving without losing yourself, walking away without hate. And for the first time, they feel what real freedom is, not the kind that demands escape, but the kind that quietly blooms when you finally stop needing permission to be yourself. Sometimes, in the quiet hours, they catch glimpses of who they used to be. A song from years ago plays, and for a moment, they feel that old version of themselves stir, the one who laughed easily, who still believed certain people would stay forever, who thought they knew what happiness meant. The memories come like ghosts, soft, bittersweet, and impossible to fully touch. They look at old photos and see a face that feels familiar but distant, like a story they once lived but can't return to. There's a strange kind of mourning in that realization, not for someone else, but for themselves, for the parts that had to die so something new could be born. Growth sounds beautiful when people talk about it, but no one warns you about the grief it brings. No one tells you that becoming who you're meant to be means letting go of who you were, even if you loved that version deeply. They start to notice the ghosts everywhere, in old routines, in places that used to feel safe, in friendships that faded quietly with time. The person they used to be still lingers in those spaces, smiling, pretending, trying. And even though they've outgrown those things, part of them still aches for the innocence of not knowing better. Ignorance had a sweetness to it, a lightness they now miss. Sometimes they wonder if the old self would recognize them now. Would they be proud of what they've become, or scared by how much they've changed. There are days they wish they could go back, just for a moment, not to stay, but to say goodbye properly, to tell their younger self, "You did your best. You didn't fail. You just evolved." But the past doesn't answer back. It only echoes. And slowly, they begin to understand that those ghosts aren't meant to vanish. They're reminders, proof of the distance traveled, the lives lived within one lifetime. The laughter, the mistakes, the heartbreaks, all of it built the person they are now. The ghosts aren't haunting them to pull them back. They're there to be honored. They start to make peace with the haunting. Instead of running from old versions of themselves, they sit with them. They remember the choices, the innocence, the mistakes, and they forgive. They realize that every version of them served a purpose, even the ones they'd rather forget. Each self was a chapter, not a failure. And slowly, the grief turns into gratitude. They begin to see beauty in the constant becoming. The ghosts soften, turning from ache into warmth. They no longer feel haunted, they feel whole. Because to grow means to die many small deaths of old identities, of dreams that no longer fit, of people who can't walk with you any further. But each ending carries its own quiet grace. They realize now that evolution isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were beneath it all, and finally letting the ghosts rest. There comes a point when silence becomes more powerful than words. They used to fill every space, talking to be polite, explaining themselves so they wouldn't be misunderstood, pretending to care about things that didn't matter just to fit in. But now, something in them refuses. They no longer have the energy to perform, to wear the social mask that demands constant noise. So they go quiet, not out of anger, but out of clarity. At first, it feels strange. The world doesn't know what to do with quiet people. When they stop talking, others fill the silence with assumptions. Some call them cold. Some call them arrogant. Others say they've changed, as if silence is a crime. But they aren't being distant, they're just done performing. Done pretending to be fine, to be interested, to be someone they're not. Silence has become their act of rebellion in a world terrified of stillness. They begin to notice how rare real silence is. Everywhere they go, people are filling the air with chatter, music, scrolling, anything to avoid facing the quiet. Noise has become comfort, distraction, escape. But once you've found peace and stillness, noise starts to feel unbearable. It's not the sound itself, it's the emptiness behind it. The way people talk without meaning, laugh without joy, live without pause. They see it all now, and the more they see, the less they want to join in. Their silence makes others uncomfortable. It's strange how something so peaceful can feel threatening. People want reactions, responses, validation, anything to prove they're being heard. But silence refuses to play that game. It doesn't bend or flatter. It just exists, calm and unmoving, and that unsettles those who rely on noise to feel alive. They start to realize silence isn't emptiness, it's strength. It's the place where truth hides, where emotions settle, where real connection begins. In silence, they can feel their own thoughts clearly. They can sense energy, motives, moods. They begin to hear the world differently, the wind through trees, the hum of electricity, the heartbeat beneath their own chest, the kind of details that only reveal themselves when the noise finally stops. Still, it's not easy. There are moments they feel misunderstood, when their peace is mistaken for pride, when people take their quiet as rejection. But they remind themselves that silence doesn't need to defend itself. It speaks in its own language, subtle, steady, unshakable. They learn that silence is not absence, it's awareness. It's what happens when the soul grows too honest for small talk, too full for meaningless sound. It's not that they don't care, it's that they care too deeply to waste words. So they stay quiet, not because they've given up on the world, but because they've finally learned how to hear it. In a world addicted to noise, their silence becomes an act of truth. And though it may unsettle others, It feels like coming home to a place where peace doesn't need to be explained, only lived. There comes a point when words stop being enough. They used to pour everything into language, trying to explain feelings, describe experiences, make others understand. But now, words feel heavy, limited, almost crude. How do you explain the quiet shift of the heart? The way intuition hums like electricity through the air? The way truth feels, not in the mind but in the body? They realize that some things can't be spoken, they can only be known. They start speaking less, not out of fear or disinterest, but because they're learning a new kind of communication, one that doesn't rely on words at all. It begins subtly, a feeling that rises before thought, a sense of knowing something without proof, a dream that speaks louder than any sentence could. The soul has its own language, and once they begin to understand it, every part of life starts to look different. They notice how the world feels more alive now. Every sound, every face, every small moment carries meaning. A gust of wind feels like a message. A random song feels like it's trying to tell them something. A stranger's eyes seem to speak entire paragraphs without ever opening their mouth. It's not magic, not fantasy, it's awareness. They're tuning into a frequency most people have forgotten exists. When they listen, they can feel what others are feeling without being told. They sense emotions behind smiles, pain behind laughter. It's overwhelming at first, like hearing too many songs at once. But soon, they learn to flow with it. The soul doesn't speak in noise. It whispers, in energy, in sensation, in sudden clarity. They begin to understand why silence matters so much. Words can lie. Thoughts can be twisted. But the soul, it never pretends. It speaks honestly, through instinct and emotion. When something feels off, it tightens in the chest. When something is right, it expands soft, warm, effortless. They start to trust that language more than anything spoken aloud. Dreams become another way the soul communicates. They're not random anymore. They're symbols, mirrors. Some nights, they wake up with answers to questions they never voiced. Other nights, they're shown memories or faces they'd forgotten, reminders of things they still need to heal. It's strange, beautiful, and often mysterious, like being guided by something just beyond sight. They learn to move through life differently now. They don't rush to explain or analyze. They listen not with their ears, but with their whole being. They start trusting the invisible, the pull of intuition, the gentle warnings, the quiet yes that needs no reason. Most people don't understand. They still live in the language of words and logic, but they no longer feel the need to convince anyone. The soul doesn't need validation, it only asks to be heard. And so they live more slowly, more softly, guided by something deeper than thought. Because once you start listening to the language of the soul, the world stops being random. Every silence speaks. Every moment means something. And every breath becomes part of a quiet, wordless conversation with the infinite. There are nights when the stillness feels too deep, when the quiet no longer feels peaceful but heavy. In those moments, they remember what it was like before all of this, before the silence, before the solitude, before they began to see so clearly. They remember the laughter that came easily, the comfort of belonging, the feeling of being part of something, even if it wasn't real. And for a moment, they ache to go back to the noise, back to the familiar rhythm of pretending everything was fine. The temptation comes gently, like a memory calling them home. They imagine walking into a room full of chatter, smiling without thinking, nodding along, blending in. They picture what it would be like to forget, to stop questioning, stop analyzing, stop feeling everything so deeply, to just be normal, to laugh without wondering why. But when they try, even just a little, it doesn't work. The laughter feels hollow, the small talk too shallow, the comfort too fragile. It's like trying to wear clothes that no longer fit. They can mimic their old self, but it feels wrong, almost painful. The illusion that once wrapped around them so naturally now scratches at their skin. The truth has changed them, not just how they think, but who they are. They begin to realize that awakening isn't a path you can walk backward. Once you've seen the machinery behind the curtain, you can't unsee it. Once you've tasted honesty, false peace feels bitter. The temptation to return is really a longing for simplicity, not the world they left, but the innocence they once had before clarity reshaped them. They grieve it quietly, that innocence, that effortless belonging. There's a softness in remembering what it was like to believe that life was as simple as fitting in, that love was as easy as being liked. But they know now that simplicity born from illusion isn't peace, it's blindness. And they can't go back to sleep once the soul has learned to see. Still, they don't blame themselves for wanting to. Growth is lonely. Awareness is heavy. Sometimes the heart just wants to rest, to be held by something familiar. They learn to forgive this longing, to let it pass through without shame. It's just the echo of who they used to be, reminding them of the comfort that once lived in ignorance. With time, the pull to return grows weaker. The world they left behind still exists, but it no longer calls to them in the same way. They see it now for what it was, a stage built from distraction and fear. And though it hurts to let it go, they know the cost of pretending would be far greater, because pretending, after truth, feels like betrayal not of others, but of the soul. And even in the loneliness, even in the ache, they know they would rather walk alone in truth than together in illusion. The temptation fades, and what remains is acceptance, quiet, grounded, and real. They begin to notice something strange about the way people look at them now. It's not the same as before. There's a distance in the eyes of others, a quiet uncertainty. Some people treat them with awe, as if they hold some secret knowledge. Others treat them with suspicion, as if their calmness is arrogance, or their silence is judgment. It doesn't matter what they say or do, people see what they want to see. They have become a mirror, reflecting the inner world of everyone they meet. At first it confuses them. They wonder what they've done to seem so different. They still feel human, flawed, emotional, learning, but to others, that humanity starts to disappear behind what they represent. Some see strength and call it coldness. Some see peace and call it detachment. Some see wisdom and expect perfection. The truth is, they're just a person who decided to see more clearly. But clarity changes how others perceive you. They realize that most people don't actually see each other. They see their own projections, hopes, fears, insecurities, painted onto whoever stands in front of them. When people look at them, they're really looking at themselves. The ones who fear their own depth are the first to call them distant. The ones who crave calm are drawn to their stillness. The ones who run from truth are unsettled by their presence. It has little to do with who they are, and everything to do with what others can't face within themselves. They start to understand that being awake comes with misunderstanding. The more authentic they become, the less they fit into other people's ideas of who they should be. They no longer play along with the roles that once kept others comfortable: the listener, the caretaker, the agreeable one. And when they stop performing, it disturbs the balance that others depended on. To some, that's freeing. To others, it feels like loss. There are moments it hurts to be seen and not truly known, to have your peace mistaken for pride, your silence for absence. They still want connection, still crave to be understood, but they learn that not everyone can meet them where they are. They start to accept that sometimes being misunderstood is the price of being real. Instead of trying to explain themselves, they learn to observe, to let others see what they need to see without taking it personally. When someone projects fear, they recognize it as fear. When someone projects love, they receive it, but don't cling. They stop fighting to be seen clearly and focus instead on seeing others clearly, not their masks, but the pain behind them, the longing hidden beneath their words. In that awareness, compassion grows. They stop resenting the projections and start understanding them. Every misunderstanding becomes a mirror, showing not who they are, but what others carry. And quietly, they realize that this too is part of wisdom, to let others have their image of you, while you stay anchored in truth. Because those who truly see you won't need words, explanations, or roles. They'll just know the same way you've learned to see yourself. Understanding changes everything, not just how they see the world, but how the world sees them. What once felt simple now feels layered. What once could be said easily now feels impossible to put into words. They try, sometimes, to share what they've learned, the insights that came in silence, the truths that reshaped them. But the moment they speak, the meaning falls apart. Words shrink what they know. Deep things don't fit neatly into conversation. So, they start saying less. It's not that they've grown cold or proud. It's that they've realized most conversations aren't built for truth. They're built for comfort. People don't really want to understand the depths. They just want to stay afloat. When they try to talk about what they've seen about illusion, awareness, the quiet ache of clarity, the words are often met with blank stares or nervous laughter. It's not that people are cruel. They just haven't seen what they've seen. And so, they fall quiet. Their silence, once born from peace, begins to look like distance. Some start to think they believe they're above others, as if wisdom has made them proud. But that's not it at all. The truth is humbling, too vast for ego. They don't see themselves as better. They just see differently. Yet in a world that fears what it doesn't understand, silence easily becomes misread as judgment. There are moments it hurts. They want to connect, to share, to belong again, but how do you explain the language of the soul to someone who only hears words? How do you describe stillness to someone who's never known silence? The gap between understanding and expression grows wider until it feels like a canyon no bridge can cross. They start to notice how lonely awareness can be. Insight doesn't come with applause. It comes with distance. The more clearly they see, the fewer people they can talk to without feeling like they're pretending. They still love people, still care deeply, but the world they now live in feels quieter, like an island of perception surrounded by a sea of noise. Sometimes they envy those who don't think so deeply, the ones who can talk for hours without saying anything, who laugh easily, who find comfort in the surface. But even envy fades. They begin to see beauty in the solitude of understanding, the quiet strength of knowing without needing to prove it. They start to realize that wisdom was never meant to make them popular. It was meant to make them whole. So they stop fighting the misunderstanding. They let their silence speak for them. Those who are meant to understand will, and those who aren't won't. It's not rejection. It's simply the way truth works. It can only be heard by ears ready to listen. In time, the loneliness softens. The isolation turns into space, sacred, still, and honest. They learn that wisdom doesn't need an audience. It only needs presence. And even if no one understands, they find peace in knowing they do. There comes a point when the loneliness begins to soften, when the silence that once felt like exile starts to feel like belonging. They walk under the night sky and notice how peaceful it is, how the world finally stops demanding, stops performing, and simply is. The darkness no longer feels empty. It feels alive. The moon, distant but constant, begins to feel like a friend. It doesn't speak, but it understands. It shines quietly, without asking for attention, and in its light, they start to recognize themselves. They begin to see their path differently now. What once felt like punishment, the solitude, the misunderstanding, the distance begins to reveal its purpose. This isn't exile, it's initiation. A journey meant to strip away everything false, so that only truth remains. They start to realize that clarity was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be cleansing. Nights become sacred. They walk, think, breathe, and let their thoughts drift beneath the silver light. The world is quieter at night, and in that stillness, the soul speaks more clearly. The moon becomes a mirror, soft, reflective, honest. It doesn't blind like the sun. It illuminates gently, showing only what they're ready to see. They begin to understand why the wise walk alone, not because they don't need others, but because truth requires silence, space to listen, to feel, to unfold. The noise of the world once kept them distracted. Now, the quiet has become their teacher. Every shadow they once feared becomes familiar. Every lonely night becomes another step deeper into understanding. The path is not easy, but it's beautiful in its own strange way. There's no applause here, no validation, no certainty, just the steady rhythm of growth. The moon watches over them like an old guardian, reminding them that light doesn't always have to shout. Sometimes it whispers, softly enough for only those who are awake to hear. They start to find comfort in their own company. The nights that used to ache with emptiness now feel full, full of thought, of wonder, of connection to something unseen. They no longer crave crowds or approval. They crave truth, presence, stillness, and they're finally finding it. There are moments when they still miss the warmth of the old world, the laughter, the closeness, the illusion of belonging. But those moments pass like clouds across the moon. They no longer chase what has already served its purpose. Instead, they walk on, trusting the faint silver light to guide them forward. They realize that solitude isn't the end of the journey, it's the bridge between who they were and who they're becoming. The moonlit path is quiet, but it's alive with meaning. Every step forward feels lighter, more honest. Clarity no longer feels like a curse. It feels like a blessing, disguised as loss. And as they walk beneath the endless night sky, they finally understand. They were never alone. The light was always there, just softer, slower, and far more sacred than they ever imagined. There comes a time in the quiet when the light isn't enough, when clarity no longer comforts and peace feels far away. It's then, in the deepest solitude, that the shadow appears. Not as a monster lurking in the dark, but as a reflection they've avoided seeing for years. It waits patiently, carrying everything they've tried to forget, the fears they buried, the anger they denied, the grief they never allowed themselves to feel. The parts of themselves they thought they had outgrown. At first, they resist. They try to push it away, to fill the silence again, to escape the discomfort rising inside them. The shadow feels heavy, too honest, too raw. But no matter how far they run, it follows not to harm, but to be heard. Because what we repress doesn't disappear. It waits. And now, with no distractions left, it finally steps forward. They begin to realize that the shadow isn't the enemy. It's the truth they were too afraid to face. It speaks in whispers, painful, but necessary. It shows them moments from their past they'd rather forget. The times they lied to fit in. The times they hurt others without meaning to. The times they stayed silent when they should have spoken. It also shows them their hidden strength, their quiet longing, their capacity for both light and darkness. The shadow doesn't just hold pain, it holds power. They start to listen, really listen. And in doing so, something begins to shift. The fear softens. The shame loses its edge. They start to understand that the shadow isn't there to destroy them. It's there to complete them. Every part of themselves they once rejected, the anger, the jealousy, the need, the sorrow, all of it belongs. It's all human. It's all them. Some nights, they sit in the dark and let the memories wash over them, the ones that used to make them flinch. They don't run anymore. They breathe through it, watching the pain like clouds passing across the moon. And slowly, they begin to see beauty in it. Because the shadow holds wisdom too. It teaches compassion, not for others this time, but for themselves. They start to forgive, not because they've forgotten, but because they finally understand. Every mistake came from a wound. Every harsh reaction came from fear. The shadow was never evil. It was just hurting. And once they see that, the war inside them ends. The silence that once felt haunted now feels whole. The darkness no longer feels threatening, it feels healing. They realize that light without shadow is incomplete. That the parts of themselves they tried so hard to hide were never meant to be erased, only integrated. By facing the shadow, they find a deeper kind of peace, not the fragile calm that depends on staying positive, but the real kind that comes from embracing everything. The light, the dark, the human, the divine. They are no longer afraid of what lives within them. The shadow, once feared, has become their teacher, and in its embrace, they finally become whole. There comes a quiet moment when they stop chasing, not out of defeat but understanding. They've spent so much of their life holding on to people, to memories, to versions of themselves that no longer exist. They clung because they cared, because letting go felt like loss. But now, after everything, they start to see that nothing was ever meant to stay forever. People change, moments fade. Even the feelings that once felt eternal eventually drift away. And instead of fighting it, they finally begin to let it happen. It's not sadness that fills them, it's peace. The kind that comes when you stop trying to control what's meant to move through you. They start to see life as a current, not a cage. Everything flows. Love, pain, friendship, time. They realize the suffering wasn't in the loss itself. It was in their refusal to accept the rhythm of change. Detachment isn't about not caring. It's about caring deeply while still allowing things to be what they are, even when that means letting them go. They think of the people who have drifted from their life, the ones who were once everything, now ghosts of old chapters. There was a time they would have chased them, begged them to stay, blamed themselves for the distance. But now, they simply wish them well, in silence. Not because they stopped loving them, but because they finally understand love doesn't always mean keeping. Sometimes, love is released gentle, quiet, honest. They start to see themselves differently too. The identities they built, the helper, the perfectionist, the strong one, all start to loosen. Those labels once gave them purpose, but now they feel heavy, unnecessary. They don't need to be anyone's idea of enough anymore. They just need to be real. And real doesn't cling. Real flows. It feels strange at first, walking through life lighter, unburdened by the constant need to grasp. But slowly, it becomes natural. The less they hold on, the freer they feel. Conversations end without fear. Goodbyes don't sting as much. Even pain passes through them like wind through leaves, still felt but not trapped. People notice the change. Some mistake it for indifference. But it isn't that. Detachment isn't coldness. It's clarity. It's the quiet understanding that everything belongs, even endings. It's knowing that love doesn't need possession to be real, and peace doesn't need permanence to stay. They start to move through life like the wind itself, touching everything, holding nothing. And in that movement, they discover a deeper kind of connection, one that doesn't depend on time or distance, but on presence. When they love now, they love freely, without fear, without demand. When they lose gracefully. The world still changes. People still come and go, but it no longer breaks them. They've learned that nothing real can be lost, only transformed. And that letting go isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of peace. Something changes in the way they see the world. It's as if they've stepped back from the noise and climbed to a quiet hill above it all. From up here, everything looks different, calmer, clearer, connected. The same things are still happening down below. People rushing, arguing, loving, pretending, but now they can see the patterns hidden beneath it all. What once felt random now feels rhythmic, like the world is playing out a story written long ago, one that everyone is a part of but few can see. They start to notice how everything repeats the same emotions, the same mistakes, the same lessons in different forms. People chase what hurts them, avoid what could heal them, and call it fate. They watch it happen, not with judgment, but with quiet understanding. They know now that everyone learns in their own time. What looks like chaos is really just growth unfolding in disguise. They see it in themselves, too. The patterns they use to fight the fears, the attachments, the doubts, they all make sense now. Every heartbreak, every failure, every quiet night alone was part of the same design: to wake them up, to bring them here, to this still place of seeing. The pain wasn't punishment, it was preparation. And for the first time, they can look back without anger. It all had to happen exactly as it did. From this higher view, the world looks softer. They no longer feel the need to fix or control it. They just observe, breathing with it, like watching waves rise and fall on an endless sea. People play their roles, some as teachers, some as mirrors, some as lessons that arrive only once. They no longer ask why people are the way they are. They simply see them, and in seeing, they understand. Everyone is trying. Everyone is carrying something invisible. Everyone is learning how to love through their own confusion. Sometimes it feels lonely to see so much. There's a quiet ache in realizing how few notice the same things. But that loneliness no longer feels like a wound, it feels like perspective. They begin to understand what true detachment is, not separation from life, but seeing it clearly while still being part of it. They are both in the play and outside of it, actor and observer, human and soul. The more they watch, the more peace they feel. The world no longer seems cruel or meaningless. It's imperfect, yes, but beautifully so, like a great cosmic puzzle that only makes sense when you stop trying to force the pieces. They start to trust that life knows what it's doing, even when they don't. And so they stay in this quiet awareness, not above the world in arrogance, but beside it in understanding. They see the rise and fall, the beginnings and endings, the endless dance of creation and loss. And through it all, they remain still a silent watcher who has finally learned that peace doesn't come from changing the world, but from seeing it clearly and letting it be. There was a time when their heart tried to save everyone. They thought love meant fixing, helping, carrying the weight of others until they broke beneath it. But after walking through the silence, after seeing the truth and standing alone in it, something changes. The storm inside them settles, and from that stillness, compassion returns not as a duty this time, but as a natural part of being alive. It's no longer loud or desperate. It's quiet, gentle, and wise. They begin to see people differently. They no longer divide them into good or bad, strong or weak. They see the pain behind every harsh word, the fear behind every cruel act. They see how everyone, in their own way, is just trying to be okay. And for the first time, they don't want to fix it. They just want to understand it, to witness it without control, to hold space instead of holding responsibility. It feels strange at first, this softer kind of love. It doesn't rush or demand. It doesn't sacrifice itself to prove it's real. It simply exists, steady and calm. They no longer burn themselves out, trying to make others see what they've seen. They've learned that everyone awakens in their own time, and forcing that process only causes pain. So they stop preaching, stop trying to wake people up. Instead, they just live truth quietly, letting their peace speak louder than their words ever could. There's a beauty in this kind of compassion. It doesn't drain, it heals. It doesn't come from guilt or obligation, but from understanding. They realize love doesn't need to fix anyone. It only needs to see them as they are. When they listen now, they don't listen to respond. They listen to feel. When they care, it's without expectation. When they give, it's without wanting anything back. They also turn that compassion inward. For years, they were kind to everyone except themselves. Now they finally understand that self-compassion isn't selfish, it's survival. They forgive their past selves, their mistakes, their old habits of trying too hard. They stop demanding perfection from their soul. They treat their own pain with the same patience they use to give others. Slowly, the inner war ends. People start to sense something different about them. Their energy feels calmer, safer. Others find peace just by being around them, even if they don't understand why. That's the quiet power of true compassion. It doesn't preach, it radiates. It doesn't ask to be noticed. It just touches everything gently and leaves warmth behind. They realize love was never supposed to hurt or exhaust. It was meant to flow freely, to connect without clinging, to give without losing yourself. And now, after everything, they finally know what that feels like. Compassion isn't about saving anyone anymore. It's about seeing them, loving them, and letting them be. And in that soft, steady love, they find something even deeper, the peace of simply understanding. For a long time, it felt like they were walking through life alone, surrounded by people but unseen, unheard, misunderstood. Their silence was mistaken for distance, their depth for detachment. They began to accept that maybe this was how it would always be, that the path of truth was meant to be solitary. But slowly, quietly, something begins to change. Out of the vast emptiness, a few souls appear. Not many, just a few. But they are different. There's something familiar about them. Something ancient, as if they've been walking the same invisible road all along. They don't meet through noise or chance. It happens gently, almost by accident, a glance that lingers, a conversation that feels deeper than it should. A moment where words fall away and understanding takes their place. These souls don't ask them to explain themselves. They don't try to fix or label them. They simply see, and being seen in that way feels like breathing after years underwater. They realize that those who walk the path of awareness can recognize one another instantly. It's not about appearance or background or belief. It's something quieter, felt rather than seen. A shared silence. A shared ache, a shared knowing that life is both heavier and more beautiful than most are willing to admit. These connections don't burn bright and fast like ordinary friendships. They glow slowly, like embers, steady, warm, real. With these kindred spirits, there's no need for pretending. They can speak without guarding every word or sit together without saying anything at all. The silence between them isn't empty, it's sacred. They talk about things that matter, the pain of growth, the peace of solitude, the strange tenderness of understanding too much. There's laughter too, but it's different now, softer, deeper, coming from a place that doesn't need to impress anyone. They begin to see the beauty of the few. Not everyone will understand them, and that's okay. Not everyone is meant to. The truth is not for the many, it's for the willing. And the ones who are willing, the ones who see, find each other like stars aligning in a quiet sky. It doesn't take effort. It just happens, as naturally as breathing. These rare connections become like mirrors, showing them how far they've come. They remind them that solitude was never meant to last forever. It was meant to prepare them for this, for the peace that comes when you find those who walk beside you, not because they have to, but because they understand. They no longer crave crowds or belonging in the old way. The few are enough. The conversations that heal, the eyes that truly see, the shared quiet that feels like home, that's enough. The beauty of the few lies in their rarity. You don't meet them often, but when you do, you recognize them instantly. And in their presence, the loneliness that once felt endless finally softens into something holy. The quiet comfort of knowing you were never truly alone after all. For a long time, they believed something was wrong with them. People said they were distant, detached, hard to read, as if their quiet was a flaw to be fixed. But as time passed and clarity deepened, they began to understand what their distance really was. It wasn't coldness. It wasn't disinterest. It was discernment, a quiet wisdom that knew peace couldn't grow in the middle of noise. The space they kept wasn't empty. It was sacred. They start to see that not every connection deserves closeness. Some energies drain instead of nourish. Some conversations take without giving. And some people mistake chaos for passion, attention for love. Once, they used to let everyone in, thinking that kindness meant openness, that to care was to give endlessly. But now they know that depth must be protected, not displayed. Not everyone is meant to touch the most fragile parts of your soul. The more they grow, the more they realize that distance is an act of care for themselves and for others. It gives space for truth to breathe. It keeps them from forcing what isn't meant to be. They stop trying to explain why they need time alone, why they pull back when things feel heavy. They no longer apologize for their boundaries. Peace doesn't need justification. People still misunderstand. They call them reserved or guarded, but they no longer take it personally. Most people have never learned the difference between isolation and self-preservation. They confuse silence with emptiness, when in reality, silence is what allows the heart to heal. The space they keep now is deliberate, not built from fear, but from wisdom. They've learned that closeness without understanding can be lonelier than solitude itself. In that distance, they find balance. They can love without losing themselves, listen without absorbing every emotion, care without drowning in it. They no longer chase connection out of need. They choose it out of alignment. And because of that, the few who do step close are met with something rare. Presence. Real. Grounded. Patient. Presence. There's freedom in not needing to be everywhere, in not filling every silence, in not explaining every boundary. They start to move through life like the tide coming close when it feels right, pulling back when they need to breathe. It's not rejection. It's rhythm. It's the natural flow of a soul that finally knows its limits. They begin to understand that distance is what keeps depth alive. The deeper you go, the more space you need to exist. Chaos can't touch what's held in stillness, and so they protect that stillness fiercely, not as a wall, but as a sanctuary. What once felt like loneliness now feels like clarity. They are no longer afraid of being misunderstood. The right ones will understand, without needing explanation. The space they keep is sacred, because it allows love to remain pure, truth to stay clear, and peace to breathe. And in that space, they finally find what they were searching for all along: freedom without disconnection, depth without destruction, and the quiet wisdom of distance. There comes a point when the endless reaching simply stops. Not because they've given up, but because they finally understand that nothing outside of them can fill what was never empty to begin with. They used to chase approval, understanding, connection, as if peace were something to earn. But now, after all the searching, they realize peace isn't found in getting what you want. It's found in needing nothing at all. At first, the quiet that follows feels strange. For so long, they've lived in motion, trying to be enough, to prove, to achieve, to be seen. Now, that noise has faded. The wanting that once drove them has burned itself out, leaving behind something softer and stiller. They no longer wake up asking what they need to do to be worthy. They just are. Existence itself feels like enough. It's not that they stop caring. They still feel deeply, still love, still dream, but the attachment to outcome is gone. They've stopped clinging to what's temporary, stopped trying to control what was never theirs to hold. They've learned that needing is different from loving. Needing comes from fear, but love comes from freedom. When you stop needing, you stop grasping, and the heart finally has room to breathe. They begin to live more slowly. Their days unfold without rush or force. They speak when it matters and stay silent when it doesn't. They no longer feel the urge to explain who they are or why they are the way they are. They no longer seek to convince anyone of their truth. The truth doesn't need convincing, it simply is. Their life becomes a quiet offering to that truth, a simple act of being real in a world that constantly asks for performance. People still come and go, circumstances still shift, but their peace doesn't move with them anymore. It's no longer fragile, no longer dependent on approval or attention. It lives within them now, steady, grounded, untouched by chaos. When things fall apart, they don't panic. They breathe. They trust. They've seen enough to know that everything rearranges itself exactly as it should. Sometimes they look back at who they used to be, the one who tried so hard to be understood, who feared being forgotten, who mistook noise for meaning. They feel no shame for that version of themselves, only gratitude. Because it was through wanting that they learned the futility of it. It was through the noise that they found the beauty of quiet. Now, they move through life like a calm river, not rushing, not resisting, just flowing. Their peace isn't loud or dramatic. It doesn't demand to be noticed. It simply exists, like breath, like light. They have finally reached the place beyond needing, where love doesn't come from emptiness, but from wholeness, and where being alive, just as they are, feels like enough. In this serenity, they discover the deepest truth of all. When nothing is needed, everything is already given. There was a time when loneliness felt like a wound, sharp, hollow, endless. It used to ache in quiet moments, when the world fell silent and there was no one to talk to, no one to fill the space. They would reach for distractions, anything to avoid that emptiness pressing in. But now, after walking so far into solitude, something begins to shift. The loneliness doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels alive, almost sacred. What they once saw as absence, they now see as presence. Not of others, but of something deeper, of self. It starts softly, in the still hours of the night, when the noise of the world has faded and there's nothing left to do but breathe. They begin to sense something glowing quietly inside them. It's not loud or dramatic, not a burst of revelation, just a steady warmth, like light flickering beneath the surface of their chest. They can't explain it, but they feel it, the soul's own light, the part of them that has never been touched by loss or fear or time. It has always been there, waiting for the silence to uncover it. They realize that loneliness isn't punishment, it's invitation. It's the soul calling you inward, away from noise and distraction, toward the truth of who you are when no one is watching. They begin to see that the ache of loneliness was never about being unseen by others, it was about being unseen by themselves. They had spent so long trying to belong to the world that they forgot what it meant to belong to their own being. In solitude, they begin to remember. They sit with their thoughts and feelings, not trying to fix them, just letting them exist. And in that gentle acceptance, something beautiful happens. Peace starts to bloom where pain used to live. They start to understand that the space they once tried to fill with people, noise, or validation was never meant to be filled at all. It was meant to stay open, so that light could move through it. There are still moments of ache, of course moments when the silence feels too wide, when they miss the comfort of company. But even in those moments, the light doesn't fade. It stays, quiet and constant, reminding them that they are never truly alone. The soul has always been their truest companion, steady, patient, and full of love. They begin to walk through life differently now. They don't fear being alone, they welcome it. Solitude has become their teacher, their mirror, their refuge. They realize that true connection begins inside, and only when you've met your own light can you recognize it in others. Loneliness, they discover, was never a curse. It was the doorway home. Beneath all the silence, beneath the ache, there was something waiting, something eternal. The light within the loneliness was never about finding others. It was about finding themselves, the soul's quiet flame, shining softly in the dark, asking only to be seen. There comes a moment when words no longer reach where they once did. They've tried explaining before, tried putting their piece into sentences, tried showing others what they've found. But they've learned that truth isn't something you can hand to another person. It's not something that can be taught through advice or lectures. It's something that must be lived, breathed, experienced. Some truths need silence. not explanation. And so, they begin to speak less and live more. They stop trying to make others understand why they've changed. The world still asks questions. Why are you so quiet? Why don't you care about the same things anymore? But they no longer feel the need to answer. How do you explain freedom to someone still clinging to chains? How do you describe calm to someone who's never stopped running? The truth they carry isn't something that fits into words. It exists in energy, in presence, in the way they move through the world. They realize that peace doesn't need to announce itself. It simply radiates. When someone has walked through their own storms and come out on the other side, there's a stillness in them that no speech can create. It's not a performance, it's being. People feel it before they understand it. It's in the way they listen without rushing to respond, in the way they choose kindness without needing recognition, in the way they no longer force outcomes but trust the flow of things. Once, they would have tried to convince others to share what they had learned, to make others see what they had seen. Now, they understand that everyone awakens at their own pace. Wisdom is not a message to be delivered. It's a path to be walked. You can't open someone's eyes before they're ready to see. You can only live as proof that seeing is possible. They begin to notice how different peace feels when it isn't trying to prove itself. It doesn't need to be defended or explained. It simply exists, untouched by misunderstanding. People may misinterpret their stillness as pride, their quiet as distance, but that no longer matters. They know who they are now, and that knowing is enough. They start to embody what they once tried to describe. Wisdom becomes something felt in their patience, their gentleness, their acceptance of life as it comes. They no longer argue about truth. They live it. They no longer chase understanding. They trust that those meant to understand will. And in that surrender, life feels lighter. They stop needing to be right, to be seen, to be understood. They realize the greatest teaching isn't spoken. It's the example of a soul at peace. Some truths are too deep for language, too sacred for noise. They can only be known through presence. So they walk quietly. No longer teachers, no longer seekers just living. Their calm becomes their message, their stillness, their voice. The wise do not convince, they simply are. And in their being, truth speaks for itself. In the end, the journey brings them back, not to the mountain, not to the silence, but to the world itself. The same streets, the same faces, the same endless hum of living. But everything feels different now. The noise that once overwhelmed them no longer reaches so deep. The chaos that once consumed them now moves around them like wind through trees. They have not escaped the world. They have simply stopped being lost in it. They walk slowly, softly, seeing everything with new eyes. The faces of strangers seem full of stories they no longer need to judge. The laughter, the arguments, the endless striving, they understand it all now. People are still asleep in the same dreams they once lived in, but instead of feeling anger or pity, they feel love. A quiet, wordless compassion for the beauty and pain of being human. They no longer feel the need to hide from the world, nor the urge to belong to it. They exist between both, in it, but not of it. They can stand in a crowd and still feel the calm of solitude. They can listen to others without absorbing their chaos. They can love without clinging, speak without noise, give without losing themselves. This is what it means to return, not to resume the old life, but to walk through it with a new awareness. People sense something in them, though they can't explain it. Their presence feels still, grounding, like standing near a quiet river. They no longer rush, no longer perform. Their eyes hold a kind of knowing that doesn't need words. Some are drawn to it, others don't understand it and move away. But it doesn't matter anymore. Connection no longer depends on understanding. It exists naturally, in the energy between hearts that recognize peace when they feel it. They notice how the world hasn't changed, only they have. The same distractions, the same illusions still swirl around, but they no longer pull them in. They move through them like a dreamer who knows it's a dream. Life unfolds as it always did: joy, loss, laughter, endings. But now everything carries a deeper softness, a quiet acceptance. They no longer demand that life be fair or easy. They only ask that it be real. Sometimes they walk alone at dusk, when the day has almost faded and the world feels balanced between light and dark. They breathe in the stillness and feel something familiar, that quiet presence that has followed them through every chapter of the journey. It's within them, not above or beyond. The peace they searched for was never somewhere else. It lived here all along, waiting to be seen. The journey ends, but it doesn't close. It continues quietly, in every breath, in every moment, lived with awareness. They have returned to the world, but not to illusion. They walk among others, gentle and steady, carrying the silence of the soul like a secret flame. The wise walk alone, but never lonely, for they have found home within themselves. And everywhere they go now feels like peace.